kicking, never quitting. Focus sharp like a blade that's hitting. From white belt dreams to the master flow, Paul Coffey's got the mic, now the stories grow. Technique entails discipline and fire. Each guest brings truth to inspire. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise, it's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Old school, new school, all styles blend. From the mat to the mic, where the arts ascend. Philosophy deep, but the vibe stays tight. Martial minds meeting in the podcast light. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise, it's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Keep kicking. Keep kicking. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins. Technique entails discipline and fire. Each guest brings truth to inspire. Keep kicking, step into your power. Keep kicking, moment to the hour. Every strike, every fall, every rise, it's a journey through a warrior's eyes. Keep kicking. Keep kicking. Paul Coffey leads and the journey begins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Keep Kicking, the martial arts podcast where I have martial conversations with my martial arts friends. And today I sit down with Chris. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself to the people?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm from Great Bay Tai Chi in Salisbury, Massachusetts. My basis is in Yang style Tai Chi, and we also teach some Bagua Zhang and Xingyi Chuan.
Very cool. Chris, how'd you get started in martial arts?
Well, I'm a child of the 80s, and so I grew up in the ninja craze. Just ate it all up. So that was really my way in. So yeah, ninja movies and Karate Kid and all of that was just, everything I was absorbing at the time. And so I was always very enamored of it. And then I guess when I was about 12 years old, I jumped into a Shaolin Kempo school and did that for several years until I went away to college. But that was where I got my start. Yeah.
What can I Shaolin Kempo? That's my base. Valari?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that Valari's pretty heavy up where you are, so.
Yeah, so that they were based around us. I don't know, and in fact, they may still be. I was not in the Valari studio system. I was in one of the offshoots. The group was called Bob Meserve's Health and Self-Defense, so I was in that line. But yeah, it's essentially the same curriculum.
It's for sure the same thing.
Yeah.
So let me ask, what has kept you going in martial arts this whole time?
Well, I guess part of the problem is I wasn't going the whole time. I got my start in Kempo, and I did that, like I said, until I went away to college. And I always kind of had intentions of continuing to practice when I went to school. But the way that the time worked out, that wasn't feasible. I was a music ed major, and that program was just too intensive. We didn't really have a lot of free time to go out and train other things. So I put it aside, and I didn't do it for a long time. And then when I was 28 years old, I was in a spot in my life where I felt like I could bring it back, and I knew that I missed it and wanted to get training again. But I realized that Kempo was not really the thing for me anymore. Like I had kind of taken what I needed from it, and I was ready to do something different. And I was looking around, and I was always kind of interested in Tai Chi. Like I knew there was something about it, and I didn't really understand it and didn't know what was going on there. So I started looking for Tai Chi schools, and I was lucky enough to find a really, really excellent teacher in the town I was living in that was really easy to get to. And once I started with him, I kind of never looked back.
What about Tai Chi kept you doing Tai Chi from then to now?
Everything.
That's a
It
good
really
answer.
just became like the center of my spiritual practice, my physical practice.
Mm,
Tai Chi has a lot of depth to it, and so there was a
mm-hmm,
lot to explore. And so about a year after I started studying Tai Chi, my wife became pregnant with triplets. And so I needed something really, really grounding that was
mm-hmm,
going to help me keep things together. And Tai Chi was really like the anchor for me. And like I said, I was lucky enough to find a really excellent teacher that kind of had it all and
mm-hmm,
was able to do the spiritual side and the stress relief relaxation side and the martial side,
mm-hmm,
and it was
mm-hmm.
really well integrated. So yeah, that became kind of my anchor and my personal practice.
Sure. So, how has teaching helped your martial applications and your actual personal practice?
I mean, it enhances everything, right? I mean, you never really understand anything until you try to teach it to someone else.
Mm,
And, going through that process of finding out what other people's questions are and realizing,
mm-hmm,
this piece of it came really easily to me and it doesn't for this other person. And I have to figure out how to describe it to them and how can we explore that and go through all of that. And,
mm-hmm,
Tai Chi is so often taught purely as a health art with no
mm-hmm,
martial practice to it at all. And so our way of thinking is if you really want to understand why Tai Chi does the things it does and you want to understand how it works, the only way to do that is through partner work, right? Exploring the push hands
mm-hmm,
and the applications. And, it's a system, and
mm-hmm,
if you're only practicing it for health, you're just never going to get that. And that doesn't mean it's not valid as a health practice. We have a
mm-hmm,
lot of students here who only come for the health benefits and are not interested in the martial side at all. And if that's what they need and that's what they want to take from it, that's fine. But anyone who really wants to get to the deeper levels needs that martial
mm-hmm,
experience. And then when someone's ready, we move them into teaching because that's how you're going to really figure it out. And you have to be
mm-hmm,
able to explore it from every possible facet in order to do
mm-hmm,
that.
mm-hmm. You said you went to school for music education?
I did. Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
first career was in music education.
How has music helped martial arts?
So it does. I don't know
Mhm.
how. I think
That's a good answer. That's a Tai Chi
there's a
answer,
lot of
actually.
connections. Like, yeah, I'm sure you've met many, many martial artists who are also musicians
Mhm,
because there does seem to be a really large cross section of overlap there
mhm,
where those people are attracted to it. And I think has the artistic quality to it, but it also involves a lot of processing and physical skill. And so you
mhm,
have to be able to interpret what's written on a page and process that through your mind and through your body to do a physical thing to make the sound
mhm,
that you want. And so I
mhm,
think there's a lot of overlap in how people learn music and how people learn martial arts in terms of that
mm,
whole process of taking information and putting it through a very specific body mechanic to
mhm,
create the sound. So I think they're very closely related and they feed each other.
mhm. Sure. So this podcast in part is selfish because, one of the reasons that we teach is to make ourselves better as martial artists. We teach to understand. And so I extended that same philosophy to this podcast, and so I ask some questions that are directly linked or related to some of the things that I'm working on in my current study. And one of the things is nonviolence, as you know from the time that I was at Keen just recently. But so I asked the question, how do you teach nonviolent people to speak the language of violence when they need to?
So I don't think you can teach a non-violent person to be violent. I think they're
Okay.
the only ones that could do that, right?
Hmm.
And so when I think about this kind of thing, I actually think back to when I was in college and when I was studying music and I was sitting next to my trumpet professor because I was a trumpet player. And
Hmm.
so, this is a person who gets paid a lot of money to teach people how to play the trumpet.
Hmm.
And we had a conversation in which he said, I cannot teach you how to play the trumpet. And, I was sort of taken aback by that at first, but he said, "You're the only one who can teach you to do it." Right? I can show you what I do and I can give you some guidance on how to get there, but the only person
Mm-hmm.
who's ever going to teach you to do it is you. And so I think when we take that into a martial context and you talk about, well, I've got this non-violent person, maybe this person was never interested in martial art and now I want to teach them these skills. I think all we can do is give them the familiarity with it and
Mm-hmm.
the permission and the safe place to play with it and work on that.
Mm-hmm.
But any skill that they develop really comes from them. And certainly any degree in which you're going to change that person's nature has to also come from them.
Mm.
We had another teacher who was teaching here for a while, really, really excellent martial artist by the name of Michael Miller. And he said, when we're looking at self-defense, and that was really what he was geared
Mm-hmm.
toward. He was doing a lot of self-defense workshops for us. He said one of the big things that everybody has to get over is this social idea that we're all taught to play nice in the sandbox, right? And we all
Mm.
have these social expectations that are on us, and giving ourselves permission to step outside of that can be a lot for some people.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of, I'm going to do something that's going to make a lot of noise and is going to attract a lot of attention and is going to be outside the sort of societal norms of what we're expected to do. But first, I have to give myself permission to do that and be willing to step outside that boundary. But I also need a safe place that I can experiment with it and training partners that I trust. And so everybody gets to explore that together. So I think, as quote unquote teachers, all we
Mm-hmm.
can really do is give familiarity and spaces to explore and train and practice and show, this is what I've found works, and this is the way
Mm-hmm.
that I've discovered I can do it for my body. You're going to have to adapt it for your body and your spirit, right? The way that you are. Not
Mm-hmm.
every technique works for every person because we're built different and we have different ways of moving through space. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing, and you and I have met in person. And so I
Mm-hmm.
know you're about a foot taller than I am. And so there are things you can do that I can't. Right. And I work with students who have very different body types from my own. And so I can say,
Mm-hmm.
well, here's the foundation, here's the structure, here's how the principles work. And then you have to put it into your own body and figure out how that's
Mm-hmm.
going to work.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Okay, so for any of the people, I don't have a large audience, but most of my audience is people that I know from my circle in my hometown. Chris is the first person that I've had on the podcast post Marshall Summit that I met in Keene at the Marshall Summit. And I'm saying that for a couple of things. One, Chris is an excellent representation of the community that Whistlekick has worked so hard to build. Like, I have been to, in 32 years of martial arts, I have been to too many martial arts events to count. And the one that has left a lasting impression is Marshall Summit because of the community of people. Everyone is, there's some sort of equal playing field that exists that I think is a phenomenal. No one walked around with their nose in the air as though they were outranking everybody else or as though they knew everything and they didn't need to learn from anything. And that environment was a breath of fresh air in the climate that exists of all martial arts. Um, and so I want my students and my fellow instructors in Louisville to pay close attention to these specific conversations because you all need to come with me next year to Marshall Summit. And I took Chris's Bagua circle walking class. Um, I have a background in Shaolin Kempo. I have done Yan style Tai Chi. I have had your class makes probably about an hour and 15 minutes in total of Bagua training. Like I've got very little Bagua training, and I would like to expound on Bagua and what it is doing. And I will start by saying the circle walking was great, and it pointed out to me that I have a very strong energetic disconnect between my upper and my lower bodies. Like I can work really well. I can throw kicks. I can have good stances, but something about the circle walking specifically is like, oh no, maybe it's my hips, maybe it's my lower back. There's some sort of disconnect there. And I left your class like, what is that? And what do I need to do to fix it to make it better? So the floor is yours, Bagua.
Well, yeah, it's interesting that you say that you found that disconnect between your upper and lower body, because
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I think internal martial arts, by which I mean Bagua, Xingyi, and Tai
Mm-hmm.
Chi, all
Mm-hmm.
really, really focus on, right?
Mm-hmm.
When people generally talk and the terms get thrown around a lot and they mean different things to different people. And so you
Mm-hmm.
hear about soft styles and you hear about internal styles as opposed to hard or external. And, what does that mean? And it really comes down to what that individual person kind of defines them as, because there's no
Mm-hmm.
standard, right? And that's
Right,
really
right.
one of the big problems we have in Chinese martial arts is things get translated and misunderstood, and then you don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you're hearing the original or not. So
Mm-hmm.
I use the term internal martial arts just kind of as a grouping of
Mm-hmm.
Taiji Bagua Xingyi. Plus, there's this other one called Luhe Bafa that's interesting that, is a whole other animal to work with.
Okay. In 32 years, I don't often hear words that I've never heard before, but we'll circle back to that.
Okay. Well, it's a
Bagua.
Bagua conversation, so circling back is the right thing
Oh,
to do,
okay.
right?
Good. Yes.
Good. So my point really is, I think those three arts that we lump together and call internal arts, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things they really focus on is that connection between the upper and lower body. And
Mm-hmm.
so you said you have experience in Yan style Taiji.
Mm-hmm.
So, the hope would be that you've got some opportunities to work with that. And that
Mm-hmm.
idea of softening the lower back and straightening the spine and
Mm-hmm.
dropping the tailbone, what a lot of Tai Chi teachers will call opening Mingmen, right? That
Mm-hmm.
flattening of the
Mm-hmm.
lumbar is really designed to get the lower body and the upper body working together, because all of our mechanics are based on taking power or energy, however you want to phrase it, from your legs and being able
Mm-hmm.
to transfer that out through the upper body.
Sure.
So Taiji really specializes in that and focuses on that in a really interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you take it to Bagua,
Mm-hmm.
Bagua takes that principle and adds all of this twisting energy in it. And so now you've got this extra challenge of, can I still keep my lower back relaxed and make my hips point one way and my belly button point another?
Mm-hmm.
And so any fault you have in connecting the lower and the upper body is immediately brought to the fore, right? And it emphasizes all of that. But yeah, Bagua is a fascinating practice, and just walking the circle without anything else, you start to discover things about how your body works and how it moves, and
Mm-hmm.
what can I move independently of this other piece and what can I not, and how do I keep all those things connected, and like you said, keep that connection between the lower and the upper body in a really different way.
Okay. You pointed out a lot of things and like maybe even in some capacity narrowed down a question
Mm,
because like my Tai Chi practice, I have somewhat of a connect between my upper body and my lower body, right? Sheet in the wind and stuff like that. I can standing still squared. I have good connection here. This is not a brag or, what, and I'm not saying by any stretch of the means I've mastered anything, but, you know, I always say I haven't mastered anything, but I got a damn good thrust punch. you know and so I can do basic rising and falling. I can feel the connect. I can feel the energy from root or ground. My Tai Chi instructor always said don't say root or don't say ground, always would say root. And I understand why he says it. So but I can feel it from root all the way up and through. But then Bagua, those twists, as soon as a twist turn, I was like, what is happening? I can't feel it. It's almost like I've bound it up and now it doesn't flow. the walking, is the circle walking enough? Is it similar to standing stick? Have you done standing stick? Familiar with?
Yes.
Is it similar in just we're just doing this one thing until we get it?
Yeah, I would say circle walking is the Bagua version of standing stake.
Mhm.
Tai Chi people that really take their standing practice seriously will do a lot of just post standing and stay
Mhm.
there to build up the mechanics of the body and the structure of the body.
Mhm.
But Bagua practices that moving. And so it changes by necessity. And I like that you use the word root, right? So
Mhm.
when I think about root in Tai Chi, I have that feeling of like a deep oak tree root sinking
Yes.
deep into the
Yes.
ground and then spreading out, right? Bagua root isn't like that. Bagua root is more like a rambling vine. Think like wild strawberries, right?
Okay.
Where it doesn't have that depth of root the way that Taiji does. It needs to be more agile. And so the root is present, but shallower and more nimble, right? Where in Taiji, like when you're standing stake and you're thinking
You're
six,
in
12
it.
inches into the ground, right? And you're growing down through your feet.
Right.
The Bagua doesn't do that the same way because it's always moving, right? And
Okay.
so yes, in some ways they're equivalent practices because they build up the fundamentals of the art. But where
Mhm.
IG you need some of that post standing to feel how all your joints and limbs connect and how do I make that all part of the root and how do I integrate my whole body so that it's
Mhm.
one thing rather than a collection of my limbs and my torso and all of that.
Mhm.
But Bagua forces you to do that in a very different way. And I alluded to this in the class that there are people who start cold with Bagua that don't have any other martial arts experience now, but that was never really the intention. The best way
Right.
that I understand it is that the founder of Bagua, his name was Dong Hai Tran, and this only goes back to about the 1860s. So as martial arts go, Bagua is very young
Yeah.
in the grand
It's a
scheme of
baby.
things, but he only taught experienced martial artists. He wouldn't
Mm.
take anybody that didn't have some other kind of experience. And so that led to a couple things. It led to Bagua being put on kind of as an enhancement for
Mhm.
whatever art you practice. But now, if you look at it, we just said Bagua is so young in its development, but its styles are so wildly diverse because the people that came to it came with different arts, right? So
Mm. Mhm.
Dong Hai Chuan
Mhm.
was known to have about like three kind of top students, two of whom really remained famous. So Cheng style, Cheng,
Mhm.
Bagua is based off of that particular student by that name. And he was kind of known as a wrestler. And so Bagua styles that derive from him have a lot of kind of throwing techniques and they move in ways that emphasize those applications. And then one of the other top students who remained famous, his name was Yin Fu. And so then you
Mhm.
get these Yin style Bagua derivations that are much more striking based because he was a striker.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
Yin Bagua and Chung Bagua can look very, very different, even though
Mm.
they're based on the same principles with the coiling and the circle walking. And they use all those twists, but they use them very differently.
Mm.
So for a young art, it's so diverse in a really interesting way.
Mhm.
But any other art that you have kind of becomes enhanced with Bagua. And certainly
Mm.
I see it blend into my Tai Chi. My understanding of Yan style Tai Chi is very coily compared to a lot of other people's.
Mhm.
My teacher's name was Paul Mahoney.
Mhm.
Is Paul Mahoney. He's still my teacher and he's still around. He studied
Mhm.
with Dr. Yang Jwing-Ming, who was very
Mhm.
prolific in this area of the country.
Mhm.
And so Dr. Yang's Tai Chi clearly has an influence of White Crane Kung Fu in it. So it's
Mhm.
already got some extra twists that a lot of
Mhm.
other Tai Chi doesn't have. And
Mhm.
so that's the line that I practice. So there's already some coiling included in my Tai Chi. But then I
Mhm.
started practicing Bagua and I started finding all these other places where I can use those twists.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it changes the way that you see your other stuff. And so as a Shaolin Kempo person, You start playing with that and you go, oh, but now I can add this and this and this that maybe wasn't there before.
So if you said the words Wing Chun, we would be almost identical, because like that's really the only other part of the base. Did branch out and do a lot of Japanese arts because of Yan style Tai Chi. My instructor, Bob Roberts, he is from Yan Ming's lineage. And there's something about the circle walking that unlocked the twists because I was doing twists and doing them kind of energetically like a Kempo twist, you know? And so it's good, it's fluid, it's strong, but the energy wasn't flowing. And your Bagua class, as a practitioner that, like, let's say my shoulders locked up and I start doing my Tai Chi and I start, trying to loosen it up and work it out. That soreness where the energy almost bounces off of that. I had that in my hips so bad. You know what I'm saying? From just walking in a circle. The next question is, do you take the circle walking and apply it to just the Tai Chi form, just and instead of a twist or instead of a sidestep, you try and circle walk with that? Do you implement it in that capacity? How do you expand out from the circle? I will also, as a side, I met Stephen Watson for the first time in person and we hung out most of the weekend. And I was just saying, like, he was asking me how things were going. I was like, yeah, I took your Bagua class and it's blown my mind and it's opened a lot of doors. I was like, you want to talk to me about Bagua? And he starts walking in a circle around me. That's all he did. I'm like, great. This is helpful, real helpful.
So your question about how would I integrate Bagua practice and Tai Chi practice and make those things work together? I think there's kind of two things. One of which we kind of already talked about, right? When you have a Tai Chi movement or an application and you discover new ways to coil and twist with your body and the new positions that puts you in, that becomes really interesting on a technique side, right? Now you've got more options than you realize that you had before. You're finding yourself in new positions and you get the chance to play with that. So there's that side of it. But the other thing, people that study probably any martial art, but I think Tai Chi people are very guilty of this, is the idea of being locked into the direction that the form asks you to go, right? We all have these sort of standard, like the form goes this way and then it goes this way and then this happens, right? Or like
And we
when I
should be
think about,
facing north.
right,
And
right. And so like when I think back to my Kempo days, right? The first couple forms that you learn, those pin-on forms that are done in an I shape, right? And that's where it lives, right? But at some point, right, Tai Chi people, we want to get to, how can I change angles? I don't have to lock into the sequence says I always face this way, right? And I'm going to say those words again. My Luhe Bafa teacher explained it really well. She said, angles are arbitrary, right? And so, yeah, there's a certain amount of things like we do this way and it's followed by this because that's a logical progression. But the fact that like our Tai Chi form moves to the right first and then it moves to the left consistently is arbitrary. And you could move that to any angle, right? And I did an online workshop actually with one of Dr. Young's disciples a couple of years ago now. And he explored this very thing and said, okay, we're going to start the form. And then we got to a certain point and he said, for the next movement, you can go any direction except the one that you're used to. And so you had to think about, all right, now I'm going to turn in this other direction and I'm going to be going a completely different way. And he would do that to you a few times, right? So that you got this sense of, oh, I'm not locked into brush, push, twist, followed by brush, push to play the lute. Does not have to move in a straight line. I can change directions, right? And Bagua does that so beautifully. And if you have Bagua as part of your practice and you understand the mechanics of walking the circle, any movement can go any direction, anytime. So it becomes really fun to play with. And so now you can do your Tai Chi form and you could stay in one little spot just because every movement you do, you're turning to a new direction. You don't have
Mm.
to at all, right? And so you get to explore these angles and changes in a new way. So I find that really fascinating.
Okay. The next question is a quick question and then a longer question. The quick question is what's the size of a circle if you're practicing by yourself?
That's a really good question, and it's one of those ask 10 teachers get 10 answers kind of questions.
I felt like it was.
Yeah. So in my particular lineage that I've inherited my Bagua from,
Mm-hmm.
our master Shan was his name. He started everyone at 12 steps around a circle. And then
Okay.
once you're comfortable at 12 steps, then it goes to 8. And then it goes to 6. Then it goes to 4. And then it essentially
Mm.
turns into you're just turning on a spot, right?
Mm.
When we are in class, as you kind of experience, right? The size of the circle is determined by the number of people participating.
Mm-hmm.
And so we adjust the circle size to give everybody that freedom of movement. But Master Shan would say 12 steps is good to start. And I agree. I like that. And then the circle shrinks from there. The little bit of
Okay.
experience I have in yin style Bagua, they start essentially going around a spot from the beginning. And they never had a circle any bigger than that. They just made their own circle really nice and tight from the outset.
Hmm.
So it's going to depend on
Interesting.
exactly what you're doing. For my money, I think as a qigong practice, as a way
Mm-hmm.
to set the fundamentals, I like starting on the bigger circle because
Mm-hmm.
the margin of error decreases as your circle gets smaller, right? So when the circle's bigger, you're not going to be quite as twisted. You can feel some things a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you make your circle smaller and those twists get a little deeper,
Mm-hmm.
you have some foundation with which to experiment rather than
Mm.
being tight from the beginning, because I think that can
Okay.
lead to certain bad habits.
Okay. So I will say, since coming back from Keen, I've been doing circle walking. I don't remember the exact hand postures that you did. So I've just been doing some of my Tai Chi hand postures as far as transitions go. What I've done, and I don't know if this is right or wrong or just different, is I've been using 3 different circle sizes. I put a bow staff down and that makes the, diameter of my circle. I put a Joe staff down and that makes the diameter. And then I put an eskrima stick down and that makes the diameter. And I've found that the bow staff is the hardest of the 3. And I can't figure out 100% why. And I don't know that that's a question that I'm asking you because that's what I'm trying to figure out for myself, so to speak.
Sure.
And so now the bigger question or conversation, that second one, is you took my class, the free to flow class, right?
Yes.
And so, like, in that specific class, we really only focused on the hand stuff. And what I'm trying to do is build a curriculum that I can give to nonviolent students as a way to give them tools of yielding, tools of energetic manipulation, because those are really important for a fight. They're really important for defusing and de-escalating situations, right? And I have some curriculum that prior to your class, I had written and felt comfortable with for stepping. And then the Bagua just kind of changed it, kind of opened it up. So, from your perspective or your opinion, how could I implement Bagua into that curriculum, into the soft, yielding, free to move, free to flow concepts?
I think the circle walking, as we mentioned before, opens up new angles to explore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess one of the questions for you in the context of how you're teaching this kind of free to flow class is what's kind of the ultimate outcome for what we'll call a successful experience, right? In that
Mm-hmm.
class, in whatever kind of altercation you're preparing for.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I understood it on the day of in Keen
Mm-hmm.
was we were essentially starting from contact and
Mm-hmm.
finding a way to yield only just enough so that I did not lose my freedom to move back in whatever direction I needed to. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And as you pointed out, we really only kind of focused on upper body, hand
Mm-hmm.
stuff. We didn't really incorporate footwork into that particular day
Mm-hmm.
because our time was so limited.
There's
But
you can't do a lot with an hour.
it's tough, right? And we only had
It's
40 minutes, 45
right.
minutes, right? So,
Yeah. You
yeah,
can't
everything's
do it.
compact.
Yeah. Felt
So,
like 15.
yeah, yeah. But I think, once you're able to incorporate any foot movement, right, that's going to open up new avenues and angles to explore. And then
Mm-hmm.
once you add into that the possibility of these circle walking steps, right, really turning the toes in, turning the toes
Mm-hmm.
out, and where does that put me, and what's now yielded, and what space am I starting to occupy?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to change the way that people can move. The kind of legendary story about Bagua is that it was designed in some part in dealing with multiple attackers. So the idea of being able to move to one person's back in order to deal with them however you need to deal with them, whether that's,
Mm-hmm.
some sort of incapacitating strike or knockdown or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
then moving seamlessly into dealing with the next person
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of the way Bagua footwork gets talked about. How accurate that is in the actual history of the thing, I think is under some debate.
Mm-hmm.
Any martial art that says you're going to be prepared to deal with 8 attackers at a time,
Right.
the red flags should be going up. We need to be paying
Mm-hmm.
attention to that. But we were playing with some applications both in Keen when you were there,
Mm-hmm.
and we just did some today in my class where one of them very easily put us to the attacker's back, and now we were able to really move in a 360-degree arc so
Mm.
that any angle was going to be the good angle, right? And
Mm.
so I could move any direction that I needed to based on whatever the situation was. So I think it would open that up, in a free
Mm-hmm.
to flow kind of class. The thing I asked you that day, I'm not sure if you remember this, but we started from contact. And I
Mm-hmm.
asked you, do you ever extrapolate this into working from distance? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And how does
Mm-hmm.
that change? And you gave me an answer at the time, but I wasn't sure that you understood what I was trying to ask,
Mm-hmm.
which again kind of comes back to what does a successful example of what happens in this class look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of go back to my idea of what self-defense is. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of stealing this from Michael Miller, who did some work with us before. He said that the goal of self-defense is get home safe, right? It's
Sure.
not incapacitate someone. It's
Mm-hmm.
not bash their head in. It's get home safe. And
Mm-hmm.
so something like circle walking or that idea of yielding before that encounter actually takes place
Mm-hmm.
would be more powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to my mind, when you had us starting from contact, there were a couple things. Like we're assuming mistakes have already been made, right? Like
Sure.
we're in a dire situation now, right? So whatever led up to that, we're not talking about that on this particular day.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's the hardest place to work from, where any amount of distance that increases, right, you have more opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
move and flow to different angles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I was approaching it from a self-defense standpoint, we talk a lot about making sure your awareness is up and
Mm-hmm.
can
Mm-hmm.
you see a potential situation developing, and then whether it involves circle walking or not,
Right.
change lanes, right, so that that's not going to be a problem for you. So I was just curious about your thoughts on that and how you've structured your own program.
Sure. So a lot of people refer to that as soft skills,
Hmm.
and I don't like that terminology because of the following. I am teaching a lot of people currently that hate the idea of violence. So for them, physical altercation still needs to be soft in some capacity. So what I've said is there's intervention, there's soft skills, and then there's harder skills. And those harder skills are what we think about as martial artists, you know, the idea of I now have to reinforce my boundary, you know? And so like, that's what we're good at that. Let's get that block so that we can then do that. And so the physical engagement aspect of things, I'm teaching a lot of what I've labeled as soft skills. Softer blocks yields redirection of an attacker's energy as opposed to a, you know, we've all experienced hard blocks from people's forearms that are strong enough to break bats. That's not what we're doing. And so in the curriculum, there is a lot of de-escalation. I've stolen Sifu's words where he said, if you're out somewhere and you have to leave and you're upset on the car ride home, be upset. That's a condition of being alive, you know? And like, that's great. Yeah. You know, leave the bar, recognize the situation. I actually go a step further in my intervention of you also have to learn how to control your face, because if you don't like something and it shows on your face, you've instigated the fight. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
And so we do all of that stuff. But the idea is there's a couple of parts. One of the parts is I teach homeless shelters. I teach rehab facilities. I teach disenfranchised individuals. One of the groups that I teach is LGBTQ, and they can get to ignore something that you don't like or that goes against your lifestyle. But the reality is, if you don't do that, you could be instigating the fight. So we do stuff like that. But then it's also like, and I also do this thing where, you know, it's a nonviolent people, right? And so it's like, okay, we're going to get to know each other. You're going to get comfortable with us and this space and this training environment. And then you have to do the hard stuff because the hard stuff's important. But what we're doing is like the assumption that like everything else that we've worked didn't work, you know, picking from Sarah Beth, she said one of her favorite things is like to try and avoid altercation is to point to the ground and go, what is that? And then just walk away with the distraction. And I'm all for distraction on your shoe, you know, sort of things. What Bagua is doing for the physical engagement side of things is it opens up more angles, which I didn't think was possible. Shaolin Kempo's got a lot of angles.
Yeah.
The Shaolin Kempo school that I worked out of, there was a Southern Inglés and Mantis practitioner. There were a lot of angles. Do you know what I'm saying? And like, you would work with Pete for 2 hours and be like, he just changed all of my kung fu. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's just one of the enrichment things that I got out of the school that I was a part of. So like, for me, 32 years of practice and then taking your class and being like, there's angles I didn't know existed is mind blowing to me. Not in like that's the ego speaking to some extent, you know, like, oh, I know every angle. Like to have the door open that wide was very, very impressive.
Yeah, Bagua is a fascinating practice, and it does exactly that. It just changes the way that you see everything.
What it changed a lot of, it makes positioning more easy for what I am labeling as soft skills, you know, because I use a lot of like Tai Chi, let's get around them and just set them on the ground. Go away. If they're setting on the ground, the time it takes them to fall, time it takes them to realize they've fallen and then get back up, I can be 10, 15 feet, you know, away. And so, well, I can be 20 because I'm really tall. I got long legs.
Right.
So I did understand the question, but I selfishly was looking at like that next component. And to my students that are watching this, I know you're tired of hearing me talk about it, but we got to work through it.
Yeah, no, I think it's great.
Thank you. Touch base on this word that I've never heard of until 15, 20 minutes ago.
Okay, Lohe Bafa, which essentially translates to 6 harmonies, 8 methods.
Okay.
is the fourth of what we kind of lump together as being the internal martial arts, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we talked about Tai Chi, we talked about Bagua. We didn't really talk about Xing Chuan, which is the third one. And then Lohe Bafa is kind of this other outlier art. And it in a sense takes the other three and blends them together so that you're practicing this form sequence that includes elements of all three of them. And so kind of like what you were asking me before, how can I take the Bagua and the Taiji and mix it together? And then can
Mm-hmm.
I throw a dash of Xingyi in there? It's also sometimes called water boxing. So if you ever hear water boxing or water style, probably also is referring to Lohe Bafa, relatively esoteric and somewhat unknown. So it's not a surprise that you hadn't really heard it before.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a really outstanding teacher that was working out of this area for a long time before he moved to Miami. His name was Waylon Wang. My teacher, Paul Mahoney, did have the chance to work with him back in the day in Boston and said it was the best Yang style Taiji that he'd ever seen. I was very enamored of him. And so, unfortunately, Master Huang, after he moved to Miami, he passed away in 2016. So he's not around anymore. But I was very fortunate enough to become acquainted with another teacher in this area, and she had learned his Lohe Bafa. And so I had expressed to her, we were talking about some other things, and I said, I'm interested in learning this. She says, well, I have it, I can teach it to you. And so it was an offer that I couldn't refuse. I was
Right.
really always fascinated by it ever since I came across it, however many years ago. There's other teachers out there teaching it. So it is out there. His form is a little different than the others that I'd seen, but I find it really fascinating. And it's changing my Taiji practice and it's changing the
Mm-hmm.
way that I'm seeing other things. I'm still very new at it. I've
Mm-hmm.
learned the sequence and am playing with it and am trying to figure out how all those mechanics kind of fit together. But it is redefining the way that I see my Taiji and my Shingi and my Bagua. So I'm really happy to have been able to add that into my practice.
How many postures are in that form?
I think I think the way it's usually written out, it's something like 88, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not really 88 postures. It's kind of 88 collections of postures.
Mm-hmm.
And so each one is kind of like four movements.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't have the numbers. I don't have it all written out the way that it's been taught to me. I'm going to try to kind of compile it in a way that makes some kind of written sense.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very challenging form. And like
Mm-hmm.
I said, it's changed the way that I see some things in my own practice.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's been great.
Maybe next year when I go to Martial Summit, you could show it to me. Like, not teach it to me, just show
Yeah.
me. Yeah.
Well, whatever level I'm at the time, right?
Yeah, totally, totally, totally.
Like I said, I'm still very new at it,
Mhm.
but it's been a lot of fun to work with and play with.
Mm, that's good. What advice would you give to anybody that is not a martial artist that is watching this podcast and would like to start?
Find a teacher you like. That's that's I think is the key, right?
Mhm.
We get I think any martial artist gets the question all the time, right? Which art should I study? There's so many out
Mhm.
there. How do I pick? If you get with a good teacher, you're
Mhm.
going to have a better experience, right?
Mhm.
And so, you can talk about, well, your body, I think this art is going to be really good for you and this other art would be really challenging. But if you
Mhm.
like the practice and you want to learn from that teacher, you're
Mhm.
going to get the good stuff. And, be willing to shop around a little bit.
Mhm.
When I came to Taiji, I had experience in martial arts. And so I kind of knew what to look for. And so
Mhm.
I shopped around the Taiji teachers, and it just turned out that the best one was the one living half a mile from where I live. And so I really lucked out. But I saw some other teachers and some other classes, and I went, nope, not this. Like,
Mm.
this is not it. So I would say, yeah, try some classes. Don't think that the first class you take is the definition for that art or how
Mhm.
it's taught. You're going to have to be willing to put some work in maybe to find a teacher or a practice that resonates with you. But then once you find it, it should not be a tall order that you're going to want to practice,
Mhm.
right? And you're going to want to get better.
Mhm.
If you're working with a teacher and you're not enjoying they're teaching and you're not enjoying the art that you're practicing, the likelihood of you continuing gets pretty slim pretty fast.
Absolutely. Well said, my friend. If you could give, this is the loaded question. If you could give every martial artist one thing, it can be a lesson, it can be a philosophy, it can be a concept, it can be a technique, whatever you want. What is the one thing you would give them?
Endless
And
curiosity.
and if it's not circle walking, it should also be circle walking.
Right, right. It should also be circle walking, but no, just endless curiosity. Right. If you approach your art and you decide at some point that you are done and you know everything there is to know about that art and you don't have any curiosity left, the art stagnates, you stagnate,
Mm-hmm.
your students stagnate, right? Nothing gets better. But if you approach things openly and stay
Mm-hmm.
curious and want to figure new things out, then there's no end. Right. And I think,
Absolutely.
you had a little ring of that in the Bagua class, and now
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to be a Bagua practitioner,
Right,
but
right.
you can now explore your art in a way that you weren't aware of before.
Sure,
Right.
sure.
And so, yeah, anybody that's been training a long time, right? I mean, we're all going to hit those lulls, right? Where we feel like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, I'm doing the thing, but I'm not feeling like I'm making any headway. I'm feeling a little
Mm-hmm.
stuck, right? Sometimes that's a beautiful time to go cross train in something else. Martial Summit was a great
Right.
opportunity for that because you get all these workshops to just play with and you can try new stuff out. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You don't like it, but you can take something from almost everything
Mm-hmm.
and go, well, that changes the way I see this. And this,
Mm-hmm.
now is new for me again. And so now I get to explore and play.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you do find brand new arts that you go, I had no idea this was what this is. And now I
Right.
get to explore something new. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, if you stay open and you stay curious, the art just continues to evolve and improve, as do you, as do your students or your community or anything, right? It just gets better.
That's well said again. And what I love about martial art is that I've been doing it for 32 years. I meet a stranger that tells me to walk in a circle and and like everything that it opens up, and like that's an oversimplification, but the fact that martial art is so in depth that one movement opens up so many other doors, whether it be circle walking or, really the first time was my introduction to Tai Chi, because you have all those moments of this punch works, this kick works, this block works, whatever. And then Tai Chi is like, oh, but you can do it with softly,
Yeah.
and it opens up a world of doors. Is there anything that you would like to say that you didn't get a chance to say?
I think the other thing that I think is worth mentioning outside of what we do here in a martial art practice
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things I created last year is a Taoism study group,
Ooh.
which might appeal to some members
Mm-hmm.
of your audience. It's something that we offer here for free. It is donation based so that, people can chip in a little bit to help us keep the lights on and keep this time slot reserved. But we don't charge a fee for it. It's not a class. I function as moderator to try to kind of help keep the conversation moving. But it's really a group driven effort. We have people that meet here in the studio, but we also have people that join us on Zoom. So you can do it from anywhere. And that's been a really interesting exploration for a lot of our people, because now you get this whole philosophical context for where our Tai Chi comes from, and people maybe
Mm-hmm.
that, are from a Western religious background, and whether they've struggled with that or not, they get
Mm-hmm.
this new way of thinking. So that's been really interesting. And so if there are members of your audience who would be interested in that, I would say please reach out.
Mm-hmm.
You said we can supply some links and emails. So
Mm-hmm.
people can reach out to me and we can get connected. But that's
Mm-hmm.
been a really fascinating study, I think, for a lot of us. And it's again kind of that endless curiosity thing, right? I've been
For
been
sure.
reading Taoist texts for
Mm-hmm.
years, decades, and not really had anyone that wants to talk about them with me. And so I started the group again, like you said earlier, it's really a selfish thing. Like,
Yeah.
I want to talk about this stuff, so I'm going to create this group, and whoever shows up, shows up. But we've had now a dedicated group that keeps coming back and like, yeah, let's dig into these thousands of years old texts and
Mm.
see what we can decipher from them and what we can, extrapolate into our own lives from them. So if that's of any interest to anyone, I hope they'll reach out, because it's a really fun group. We have some great conversations, and it's been really interesting for us.
That's great. It's interesting to me as well. So I will make sure that I get your links and we put them in the show notes. I want to thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me. And like I say to everybody else that sits down and has these conversations with me, but double down for you, because I've also been a part of a class that you taught. You are now a part of my martial arts journey, whether you like it or not. And I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you for the circle walking, all that. Everybody that watched or listened, thank you. And always keep kicking.